Go ahead and pick up that trash, Sarah. The military pays dirt right. Consider it a favor so you can pawn it for scrap metal. My stepmother's stiletto heel slammed into the wooden box. Crack! My father's military medals scattered across the floor, rolling right up to the toes of my cheap flat shoes. Julian, my biological brother, stood nearby. He swirled the expensive bourbon in his glass and let out a sneer. Take the hand out, little sister. Dad's dead, this house is going up for auction, and nobody's carrying dead weight anymore. A brutal slap of reality. They were stripping me bare, humiliating me right in front of dozens of wealthy antique dealers. But I didn't cry. I just stood up straight, hands pinned to my thighs in a rigid parade rest. Because the people currently gloating and trampling all over me had absolutely no idea they weren't lecturing some deadbeat daughter. They were pissing off a captain in the United States Navy. And the absolute worst part, the ground they were standing on, the roof over their heads, and even the damn glass in my brother's hand, legally belonged to me. But before I tell you the ruthless trap I set for them and who ended up on their knees begging, first hit like, subscribe, and don't look away. Because the payback in this room is going to leave you breathless. The auction hall buzzed. A low, ugly hum of gossip from the local elite. Dozens of eyes tracking the drama. They pointed. They whispered behind crystal champagne flutes. Victoria waited for me to break. She wanted me on my knees on that cold marble floor, scrambling for pieces of tarnished bronze and frayed ribbons like a stray dog fighting for table scraps. She wanted the guests to see the pathetic, broke stepdaughter being put in her place. I didn't move a muscle. My eyes locked dead onto hers. No tears, no flinching, just a flat, dead stare. The total absence of obedience threw her off. The muscle in her jaw twitched. Her fake Botox-tightened smile slipped for a fraction of a second. The heavy scent of her Tom Ford perfume, sickly sweet and suffocating, hung in the air between us, masking the smell of dust and old wood. She hated my silence. She demanded a reaction, a breakdown. Instead, I gave her a brick wall. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. Box breathing. It's the first thing they drill into your head in the Navy to keep your heart rate from blowing up when the shooting starts. I let the oxygen kill the adrenaline burning in my veins. My brain shifted out of civilian victim mode and snapped into a cold, tactical assessment. I swept the room. Threat analysis. Julian was already 3 drinks deep into the good bourbon. He was swaying near the grand piano, his designer tie undone, looking sloppy and weak. Brittany, my older sister, was barking frantic orders at 2 moving guys aggressively wrapping a $2,000 oil painting in thick plastic. Up front by the podium, the hired auctioneer kept checking his gold Rolex. He was sweating through his cheap gray suit, desperate to drop the hammer and start the bidding. It was a messy, disorganized unit. A cluster of greedy amateurs rushing to loot a sinking ship before the water rushed in. Brittany noticed the standoff. She dropped the tape dispenser and marched over her heavy designer boots, clicking aggressively against the stone floor. She didn't even look me in the eye. Instead, she reached into her leather purse, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and shoved it right into my chest. "Take it," she snapped. Her voice dripped with that fake, grating pity she reserved for homeless people at stoplights. "Get yourself some gas to drive back to whatever miserable base you crawled out of, and do it now. You're depressing the VIP buyers standing around looking like a charity case." $100. A crumpled Benjamin Franklin slapped against my jacket to buy my absence. It was the ultimate financial insult. The final layer of dirt thrown on my grave. She wanted to prove right here in front of half the town that I was nothing more than a pathetic loser intruding on their high society payday. I didn't reach for the money. I just let the bill fall. It fluttered down, landing dead center next to my father's silver star. I didn't say a single word. Words were a waste of good ammo on these people. I just took a slow, deliberate step backward, out of the glaring chandelier light. I faded into the shadows near the heavy oak doors, folding my arms tightly across my chest. Let them have it. Let them gorge themselves on this fake victory for just a few more minutes. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, they couldn't see the legal guillotine hanging right over their necks. Standing in the dark, staring at that discarded $100 bill on the floor, my stomach tightened into a knot. The smell of that crisp paper and cheap ink did something to my brain. It ripped me backward. Because this wasn't the first time they had treated me like a financial burden. My jaw clenched as the cold draft from the doorway hit my face, dragging me straight back to the bitter, empty morning I turned 18. I stood in the shadows of the auction hall. My eyes drifted away from the crumpled $100 bill on the floor. I looked up at the faded rectangular mark on the wall. That was where the massive oil-painted family portrait used to hang. Staring at that empty space, the stale air of the room faded. The smell of expensive perfume vanished. Suddenly, it was not an auction. It was a cold November morning. My 18th birthday. No balloons, no cheap vanilla sheet cake from the local grocery store. Just the harsh, buzzing hum of the fluorescent light in the kitchen. I stood alone on the cold linoleum floor. On the granite counter, a thick envelope from Chase Bank was waiting for me. It had my name printed on the front, but the top edge was already ripped open. My fingers felt numb as I pulled out the single sheet of paper. It was the college trust fund, the money my grandmother left specifically for me before she died. I had spent 4 years in high school studying until my eyes burned, mapping out a future that depended entirely on this exact account. The paper felt heavy, like a sheet of lead in my hands. I scanned the lines of black ink. Date, transaction, wire transfer out, balance $0, $40,000, gone. Evaporated into thin air. Every late night studying every college brochure I'd hoarded under my mattress, wiped out by a single bank transaction. Before my brain could even process the theft, a heavy guttural roar shook the living room windows. I looked outside. Julian pulled into the driveway. He was behind the wheel of a brand new jet black Porsche 911. The dealer plates were still bolted to the bumper. He killed the engine and stepped out. I could smell the burning rubber and the rich imported leather interior all the way from the front porch. He tossed the heavy key fob into the air, caught it, and flashed a massive, arrogant grin. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. My lottery. I did not scream. I marched straight down the hall and kicked open the heavy mahogany door to my father's study. I slammed the bank statement down on his massive desk. The paper hit the wood with a sharp, violent smack. My father did not flinch. He sat back in his leather chair, taking a slow drag from his cigar. He exhaled a thick, toxic cloud of gray smoke right into my face. He looked at me with absolute dead, hollow eyes. He did not see a daughter standing there. He saw a nuisance. He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a thin manila folder, and threw it across the polished wood. It slid and stopped right against my chest. "Julian is a man," my father said. His voice was flat, heavy with irritation. "He's building a business. Corporate clients look at what you drive. He needs the image. You are a girl. The military provides 3 meals and a cot. Figure it out yourself." A normal 18-year-old girl would have broken down. She would have begged. She would have screamed about fairness, about the law, about family. I did not do any of that. The last drop of warmth in my chest froze solid. I was not a daughter in this house. I was just collateral damage. A disposable funding source for the golden boy. Family is supposed to be your safe harbor. But sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones holding the knife. If you have ever been treated like a financial burden or thrown away by your own parents, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel right now. Drop a 1 in the comments if you know exactly what it feels like to finally walk away from a toxic family. Your comment tells me I am not fighting this war alone. I looked down at the folder my father threw at me. I opened it. It was a United States Navy enlistment contract. He already had it printed out. He had planned this theft down to the last detail. I reached forward and grabbed the heavy brass pen from his desk set. I did not hesitate. I pressed the tip to the paper and signed my name on the dotted line. The scratching sound of the ink was the only noise in the room. I dropped the pen. I turned my back to him and walked out the front door. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me. I stepped off the porch and walked into the freezing morning air. I was done with this house. The ocean was waiting. The ocean did not care about my last name. It only cared if I flinched. 20 years later. The Pacific was a black, churning nightmare. A Category 8 storm hammering the steel hull of the guided missile destroyer I commanded. Rain lashed against the armored bridge windows like buckshot. The deck pitched hard to port. 30 degrees. The metal groaned a deep, ugly sound of thousands of tons of steel fighting the ocean. Alarms screamed over the comms. Down in the belly of the ship, an 18-year-old machinist mate was bleeding out from a crushed femur. He needed a medevac right now. The wind was howling at 80 knots. "Hold your course, helmsman," I said. My voice did not shake. It cut straight through the noise. 300 sailors on this ship. 300 highly trained killers, technicians, and kids from all over the country. When I spoke, they moved. They did not ask questions. They did not look at me like I was a burden. They looked at me because I was their captain. I kept my boots planted on the vibrating steel deck, my arms locked securely behind my back. We held the line. We got the kid onto the chopper. We survived. 2 weeks later. The air smelled like lemon polish, stale coffee, and old paper. The Pentagon was a completely different kind of war zone. No crashing waves, no screaming wind, just thick carpets, heavy oak doors, and silence that could ruin your career. I stood at parade rest inside the office of Admiral Thomas Vance. The brass clock on the wall ticked loudly. Vance was a 60-year-old bulldog of a man. A guy who chewed on unlit cigars and did not hand out compliments. He did not ask me to sit down. He picked up a thick manila folder from his desk and tossed it across the polished wood. It slid and stopped inches from my hands. Stamped across the front in thick red ink, "Confidential." "Your routine security clearance background check just came back, Captain," Vance said. His voice was gravel. He leaned back in his heavy leather chair. "You have a massive liability." I did not move. A liability in my financial background meant losing my top secret clearancy. It meant losing my ship. It meant losing everything I had built with my own 2 hands. "Open it," he ordered. I flipped the heavy cover open. The pages were filled with bank logos, court seals, and red numbers. Lots of red numbers. I stared at the name at the top of the foreclosure notice. My father. The man who told me I was useless because I was a girl. The man who bought his golden boy a Porsche with my college money just to project a strong business image. He was completely bankrupt. He gambled heavily on commercial real estate back in 2019. Stupid, arrogant bets. The market shifted and he doubled down like a desperate degenerate at a cheap blackjack table. He burned through his cash reserves. He burned through the equity. He took out predatory loans to keep up the fake appearance of wealth. The country club dues, the luxury cars, the tailor-made suits. All of it was built on a rotting pile of debt. Now the bill was due. The final paper was a notice of default from Chase Bank, the exact same bank that held my stolen college fund 20 years ago. The irony tasted like pennies in my mouth. The bank was seizing the 17-acre family estate. Total foreclosure. He had exactly 7 days before the county sheriff showed up, changed the locks, and dragged his custom-made Italian leather furniture onto the curb for the whole town to see. I closed the folder. The paper made a soft, dry slapping sound. I kept my face totally blank. My heart rate stayed flat. There was absolutely no pity in my chest, just the cold, hard reality of a target painting itself. Vance watched me carefully. He had read the file. He knew exactly what those people were. "Teddy Roosevelt had a good quote," Vance said quietly. He folded his thick hands on the desk. He said the glory belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. He looked down at the folder, then back up at me. "Your family is drowning, Sarah. They are going under for the last time. As your commanding officer, I am telling you, this clears your background check. You are not financially tied to their mess. As your mentor, I'm asking you a question." Vance paused. "Are you sending a rescue chopper or are you dropping a torpedo?" I looked at the red confidential stamp. I thought about the torn envelope on my 18th birthday. I thought about the fake smiles, the expensive suits, and the sheer arrogant entitlement of the people sleeping in that massive house. I did not want them to drown. Drowning was too fast. Drowning was a relief. I wanted to own the water they drowned in. "Neither, Admiral," I said. My voice was ice. I picked up the folder. "I am buying the ocean." I walked straight out of the office. I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket and made a single, untraceable call to a private attorney down in Virginia. "It is time," I told him. "Initiate the Valiant Trust." I sat alone in the secure communications room. There were no windows. There was just the low grating hum of the server cooling fans and the bitter smell of burnt coffee and ozone. The Panasonic laptop felt heavy and cold under my fingers. I typed in the encrypted military authorization codes. My hands did not shake. The screen threw a flat blue glare across my face in the dark room. I opened the offshore routing protocol. Wire transfer. Destination, the Valiant Trust. Amount $4,200,000. Cash. Every single dollar of that money was earned in the dirt. It was built on hazard pay from 3 combat tours in the Gulf. It was built on months of eating sand, sleeping in heavy body armor, and breathing in diesel fumes. It was multiplied by smart, aggressive real estate flips near the naval bases back home. I did not buy designer clothes. I did not buy sports cars. I bought a guillotine. I moved the cursor over the final prompt. I hit the enter key. The plastic clicked loudly in the silence. The screen flashed green. The money was gone. The trap was set. 6,000 miles away in a high-rise law office in Virginia, the air conditioning was running at full blast. But the man sitting across from the massive oak desk was suffocating. A cold, greasy sweat slicked the back of my father's neck. It soaked into the stiff collar of his custom-tailored Brooks Brothers shirt. He stared at the thick stack of legal documents resting on the polished wood. The foreclosure papers. The absolute end of the line. The bank was coming for the 17-acre estate. They were coming for the imported Italian furniture, the crystal chandeliers, the oil paintings. He reached for the heavy brass pen. His hand trembled so badly the metal rattled against the desk. The gold Rolex on his wrist was practically worthless now. It was just a shiny anchor dragging him to the bottom. His country club friends would not loan him a single dime. His business partners had stopped returning his phone calls. He was completely cornered. He had spent his entire life looking down on people who worked for a living. Now he was the poorest man in the room. The defense attorney tapped the paperwork with a perfectly manicured finger. "The buyer is a blind entity," the lawyer said. His voice was flat. He did not care about my father's broken pride. "The Valiant Trust. They are paying off the entirety of your debt to Chase Bank in pure cash. The foreclosure goes away today." My father looked up. His eyes were red, bloodshot, and desperate. He swallowed hard. He needed to hear the catch. "In exchange," the lawyer continued, sliding a separate document across the desk, "you sign over total legal ownership of the property and all its contents. Every piece of art, every piece of silver. However, the trust has authorized a life estate clause." The lawyer leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You are permitted to reside in the house until the day you die. You pay the property taxes. You maintain the grounds. To the outside world, you still own the estate. Nobody at the country club will ever know you lost it all. Nobody will know you are just a tenant." It was the perfect poison, a lifeline built entirely out of pure humiliation. The trust was allowing him to keep his fake, hollow image. He could still play the wealthy, successful patriarch in front of his golf buddies, in front of his parasitic wife Victoria and his lazy son Julian. But inside those walls, he would know the ugly truth every single day. He owned absolutely nothing. He was renting his own life from a faceless ghost. He did not ask who was behind the trust. He did not care. His toxic pride was bleeding out on the floor, and he was desperate for a bandage. He gripped the pen. The metal scratched harshly against the thick paper. He signed his name. He sold his soul just to keep up a lie. 1 year later. The dead silence of my quarters was broken by a sharp electronic scream. My encrypted satellite phone vibrated violently against the cold metal nightstand. 0200 hours. I sat up in the dark. The steel deck was freezing against my bare feet. I picked up the receiver. "He is dead." Victoria's voice crackled through the terrible connection. She sounded exhausted, but there was a sharp, greedy edge hiding right underneath the fake grief. She was not mourning a husband. She was already calculating her inheritance. She was probably standing in the master bedroom looking at his jewelry box and doing the math. The funeral is on Thursday, she snapped, not waiting for a response or offering any comfort. Do not expect us to pay for your flight. We have a lot of expensive legal matters to handle with the estate. She hung up. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. I looked at the black screen in the dark room. They really thought they had won. They thought the old man had left them an empire to loot. They had absolutely no idea they were already trespassing. I stood up. I walked over to the metal locker, opened the heavy door, and reached for my dress uniform. The waiting was over. I pulled my 12-year-old Subaru Outback through the heavy iron gates of the 17-acre estate. The tires crunched loudly against the gravel driveway. The paint on my hood was chipped from years of highway driving. I parked it right next to the lineup of heavy metal near the front porch. Julian's black Porsche. Brittany's brand new Range Rover. A sea of leased luxury vehicles reeking of debt and fake status. It was a funeral, but it looked like a high society networking event. Groups of distant relatives and local elites stood on the manicured lawn. They were holding crystal glasses, whispering, pretending to care. I stepped out of the car. I was wearing my dark navy uniform. No medals, no flash, just clean-pressed wool and sharp creases. Victoria waited for me at the bottom of the front steps. She wore a black designer dress that cost more than a standard military paycheck. A sheer veil covered the top half of her face, but it could not hide the sharp, predatory curve of her mouth. She crossed her arms as I walked up. "Sarah," she said loudly. Her voice carried over the quiet chatter on the lawn. Several heads turned our way. "You drove that thing all the way here. I thought the military paid officers better than that. You should have called. I could have wired you money for a decent rental car." It was a calculated strike, a public execution of my pride right on the front steps. She wanted everyone to see the poor struggling stepdaughter arriving in a beater car to beg for scraps at the patriarch's funeral. I stopped on the bottom step. I did not look at her dress. I did not look at the crowd. I looked dead into her eyes. "Where is my room?" I asked. My voice was flat, heavy. Victoria let out a short, breathy sigh. It was the kind of sigh a mother gives to an annoying toddler. She reached into her expensive leather clutch. She pulled out a cheap, scratched plastic key card attached to a flimsy keychain. She tossed it. It hit the stone step by my boot with a dull, pathetic plastic clatter. "We are completely full," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Julian's business partners are taking the guest house. The relatives have the spare bedrooms. I booked you a room at the Holiday Inn out on the interstate. It is already paid for. Consider it a favor." A Holiday Inn on the highway, next to the truck stop. While Julian's random golf buddies slept in the heated guest house of a 17-acre estate. It was a brutal psychological shove out the door. A reminder that I had no bloodline privilege here. I was just an outsider polluting their clean air. I bent down slowly. I picked up the plastic key card. The edges were chewed up and sticky. "Thank you," I said. Victoria smiled, a thin, victorious sneer. She thought she had broken me. She reached up with her left hand to push a stray piece of blonde hair back under her veil. The afternoon sun hit her hand. A sharp, blinding flash of light caught my eye. I stopped breathing. The muscles in my neck tightened so hard they burned. On her left ring finger, sitting right above her gaudy wedding band, was a 2-carat custom-cut diamond. It was set in a heavy vintage platinum band with a distinct floral engraving. It was my mother's ring. My real mother. The woman who died when I was 12. That ring had sat in a locked velvet box in my father's safe for 20 years. It belonged to me. It was the only physical piece of her I'd left in the world. And this woman had taken it out, resized the band to fit her own thick finger, and was wearing it to my father's funeral like a cheap trophy. The blood roared in my ears. The Navy had taught me how to kill a man in close quarters. For 3 seconds, every instinct in my body screamed at me to grab her wrist, break her fingers, and rip that platinum band right off her hand. I could see the exact angle I needed to strike. Family is supposed to protect your history, not steal it. But some people will take everything from you and wear it like a prize. If you have ever watched a toxic family member steal something sacred from you, whether it was money, an heirloom, or just your peace of mind, hit the like button and subscribe right now. Drop a yes in the comments if you know the exact kind of rage I was feeling in that moment. I did not strike her, I did not scream, I did not say a single word. I just stared at the diamond until the flash of light faded. I absorbed the insult. I swallowed the rage like broken glass, letting it tear up my throat on the way down. I squeezed the cheap plastic keycard in my hand until the edges cut into my palm. I turned my back on her, walked to the Subaru, and got in. I threw the car into gear and drove out the massive iron gates. That night, the air inside the Holiday Inn room smelled like old cigarette smoke and industrial bleach. The neon sign outside the window buzzed constantly, casting a cheap red glow across the stained bedspread. I sat at the wobbly particle board desk. I flipped open my encrypted laptop. The screen booted up, illuminating the dark room. I dialed a Virginia area code. The line clicked open. "Hutchkins," the lawyer answered. His voice was tired. I did not say hello. I looked at the red neon light bleeding through the blinds. "Prepare the documents," I said. "The waiting period is over. It is time to trigger the Valiant Trust." The mahogany study smelled like stale cigar smoke and expensive cologne. The heavy velvet curtains were pulled back, letting the afternoon sun highlight the dust floating in the air. We sat in a semicircle in front of the massive oak desk. Lawyer Hutchkins sat behind it, shuffling thick stacks of legal paper. Julian slumped deep into a leather wingback chair. He nursed his second bourbon of the day, the ice clinking softly against the glass. Brittany sat next to him, violently tapping her acrylic nails against the armrest. Victoria sat dead center. She was still wearing her black funeral dress, the stolen diamond catching the light every time she adjusted her posture. I stood by the door. Parade rest, boots shoulder width apart, hands clasped behind my back. I did not want to sit on his furniture. Hutchkins cleared his throat. He started reading the last will and testament. It was a fairy tale, written by a dead man. "To my son Julian." Hutchkins droned on, reading the boilerplate legal text. "I leave the entirety of my commercial real estate portfolio and the remaining tech stocks." Julian took a slow sip of his bourbon. He tried to look solemn, but a smug little smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "To my daughter, Brittany, I leave the European art collection and the silver." Brittany stopped tapping her nails. She let out a heavy sigh of relief. Hutchkins turned the page. The paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. He adjusted his glasses and looked down. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "To my daughter, Sarah, I leave the contents of the locked cedar box in the attic, the military medals." Silence hit the room. Julian brought his hand up to his mouth, pretending to scratch his chin to hide a wide, mocking smile. Brittany rolled her eyes. A box of rusted bronze and frayed ribbons. It was his final insult from the grave, a deliberate, calculated slap to the face to remind me that, even in death, I was nothing but trash to him. I did not blink. I kept my breathing even. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. "And finally," Hutchkins said, picking up the last heavy sheet of paper. "The 17-acre estate, the main house, and the guest properties." Victoria sat up straight. She crossed her legs, her eyes locked onto the document like a hawk. "I leave the property in a spousal trust for my wife Victoria for the remainder of her natural life." Victoria let out a soft, breathy laugh. The fake grief was completely gone. She reached over to the silver ice bucket sitting on the side table. She pulled out a chilled bottle of Dom Perignon. Her thumb pressed hard against the foil wire. She was getting ready to pop the cork. She was ready to celebrate claiming her throne. "That is impossible," I said. My voice cut through the room like a scalpel. It was not loud, but it stopped everyone dead. Victoria's thumb froze on the cork. Julian lowered his glass. I unclasped my hands. I walked over to the heavy oak desk. I reached inside my jacket, pulled out a thick file bound with a red tamper-proof legal seal, and dropped it right on top of the will. The heavy file hit the wood with a dull, violent thud. "What the hell is this, Sarah?" Julian snapped. "Can you stop acting like a psycho for 5 minutes?" I ignored him. I looked straight at the lawyer. "Open it, Hutchkins. Read the deed." Hutchkins frowned. He reached out with a trembling hand and broke the red seal. He flipped the cover open. His eyes scanned the top page. The blood instantly drained from his face. His skin turned the color of dirty chalk. "He didn't own this house," I said flatly, looking at Victoria. "He went broke. He defaulted on everything. He sold the entire estate 13 months ago to clear a foreclosure." The room went dead silent. The kind of silence that happens right after a car crash before the screaming starts. "You are lying!" Victoria shrieked. Her voice cracked. She dropped the champagne bottle back into the ice bucket. Ice water splashed over the edge and soaked into the Persian rug. "I am his wife. I have spousal rights. This house belongs to me." "He signed a life estate agreement," Hutchkins whispered. He looked up completely horrified. He realized he had been played too. "He sold the property to a private trust. He was just a tenant. He was allowed to live here until he died to keep up appearances. But the property rights transferred immediately." "And the seller is dead," I said. I stepped right up to Victoria. I looked down at her. The panic in her eyes was raw and beautiful. The arrogant queen was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. The life estate clause only covered the seller. "Your name is not on the deed. You have no spousal rights to a rental property." I leaned in close. The smell of her perfume made me sick. "Welcome to the street." I did not wait for the screaming to start. I turned my back and walked straight out of the mahogany study. I shut the heavy door behind me, trapping them in the wreckage of their fake empire. They had absolutely no idea who actually owned the trust, and I was going to let them bleed out a little longer before I told them. 2 weeks after the reading of the will, I was standing on the bridge of my destroyer, looking out at the gray horizon, when my encrypted phone buzzed. It was an email from Hutchkins. The subject line was blank. I opened it. Attached was a high-resolution PDF flyer circulating among the local antique dealers and wealthy scavengers back home. An estate auction. Victoria was trying to liquidate the entire house. She knew she had no legal right to the property anymore, so she went scorched earth. She was going to sell off the imported furniture, the oil paintings, the silver, everything not bolted to the floor before the trust could officially evict her. She wanted the cash. She wanted to run. I did not bother changing clothes. I requested emergency leave, walked straight off the ship, and caught the first commercial flight out of Norfolk. I was still wearing my high-ranking Navy combat uniform, the dark camouflage, the heavy combat boots. 3 hours later, I was back in the grand foyer, right back where we started. The heavy wooden box hit the marble floor. Crack! My father's bronze medals scattered near my boots. Julian swirled his expensive bourbon and spat his insult. Brittany shoved the crumpled $100 bill into my chest, telling me to buy gas and leave the VIPs alone. I stood in the shadows near the heavy oak doors. I let the sting of their words wash over me. I looked at the crowd. The auctioneer was standing behind the podium, wiping sweat from his forehead with a cheap handkerchief. He raised his heavy wooden gavel. He was ready to start taking bids on the leather sofa. I stepped out of the shadows. I did not yell. I just walked forward. The sound of my heavy combat boots hitting the cold marble floor echoed like gunshots. A slow, heavy, rhythmic thud. The crowd of wealthy buyers turned to look. Their murmurs died instantly. A woman in a dark navy combat uniform, moving with the cold, mechanical precision of a predator, has a way of sucking all the oxygen out of a room. The crowd automatically parted, stepping back to give me a clear path to the front. I stopped right in front of the podium. I did not look at the auctioneer. I looked straight at Victoria. She was standing near the grand piano holding a clipboard, her face completely frozen. "Put the gavel down," I commanded. The auctioneer jumped. He lowered the wooden mallet slowly. I turned my head slightly so my voice carried to the back of the room. "Not a single item in this house is permitted to be sold." Silence. The kind of heavy, uncomfortable silence that makes people shift nervously on their feet. Victoria snapped. The panic she had been hiding for 2 weeks suddenly exploded. She marched across the room, her high heels clicking frantically against the stone. Her face was flushed dark red. The vein in her neck bulged against her expensive jewelry. "You have no authority here," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. This is an illegal eviction. I demand to speak to the owner. Call the coward hiding behind the valiant trust. I want them standing right in front of me to negotiate this. She stood there breathing heavily, completely blinded by her own desperation. She demanded to see the owner. She demanded to look the ghost in the eye. I stayed perfectly still under the bright chandelier light. I locked my eyes onto hers. Careful what you ask for, Victoria. The heavy oak doors at the back of the grand foyer groaned open. Hutchkins, the family lawyer, pushed his way through the sea of wealthy antique dealers and local socialites. He looked like a man walking to a firing squad. Sweat stained the collar of his expensive seersucker suit. He clutched a thick leather briefcase to his chest, like a shield, breathing hard, his eyes darting around the room. The auctioneer leaned over the podium. He tapped his wooden gavel nervously against the wood, trying to maintain control of the restless crowd. Mr. Hutchkins, what is the meaning of this? We are trying to conduct a legally sanctioned estate sale. Who has the authority to halt this auction? Hutchkins reached the front. He refused to look at Victoria. He refused to look at Julian. He dropped his briefcase onto a side table, unlatched the brass locks with shaking fingers, and pulled out a heavy stack of papers. The red tamper-proof legal seal had already been broken. The property is not in probate, Hutchkins said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again, forcing the volume up. The estate, the house, the land, and all physical contents within it are the exclusive property of a private entity, the Valiant Trust. The deceased was merely a tenant. Victoria froze. The color drained completely out of her face, leaving her expensive spray tan looking sick and pale. Then call them, she shrieked. Her voice echoed harshly off the high ceiling, sounding shrill and desperate. Call the trust. Tell them I am the widow. I have the right to negotiate. The auctioneer wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. He looked at Hutchkins. Who is the representative for the trust, sir? I unclasped my hands from behind my back. The movement was small, but in that dead quiet room, it drew every single eye. I stepped out from the shadows of the doorway and moved into the center of the foyer, right under the massive crystal chandelier. The heavy rubber soles of my combat boots squeaked slightly against the polished marble, a slow, deliberate sound. I looked at Victoria. Her chest was heaving. I looked at Julian. He was gripping his glass of bourbon so hard his knuckles were bone white. I looked at Brittany. She had stopped giving orders to the moving guys and was shrinking back against the wall. The Valiant Trust is a blind entity, I said. My voice was low, flat. I did not yell. I let the sharp acoustics of the marble room do the heavy lifting. It was established 13 months ago with a single massive cash deposit, and the sole beneficiary. I paused. I let them hang right on the edge of the cliff. I wanted them to look down into the dark abyss before I pushed them over. Is Captain Sarah Reese. I am the legal owner of this estate. The ground you are standing on, the roof over your head, the paintings on the walls. It all belongs to me. Crash. The crystal champagne flute slipped from Victoria's fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered into 100 jagged pieces. Shards of glass skittered across the floor, bouncing off the toes of my boots. Champagne foamed and pooled around her expensive designer heels. She did not even flinch at the mess. Her jaw dropped. Her eyes went wide and vacant, staring at me like she was looking at a ghost. Julian shook his head. Fast, jerky, desperate movements. No. He stepped forward, pointing a shaky finger at my chest. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. You are a government employee, Sarah. You make a fixed salary. You live in a tin can floating on the water. The trust paid $4.2 million in cash. Pure cash. He looked around at the crowd, desperate for someone to back him up. A nervous, ugly laugh bubbled up from his throat. You don't have that kind of money. You're lying. You're out of your damn mind. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I closed the distance. 3 long, heavy strides. I stopped 6 inches from Julian's face. He was taller than me by half a foot, but he instantly shrank back. He smelled like cheap breath mints, stale sweat, and expensive liquor. His eyes darted away from mine, weak. I kept my voice low, creating a tight, suffocating bubble just for him, Victoria, and Brittany. You think I stayed broke? I asked. The words hit him like physical punches. While you were leasing German sports cars and playing golf on Dad's maxed-out credit cards, I was doing combat deployments. I lived in the dirt. Hazard pay. Imminent danger pay. Tax-free combat zone exclusions. I didn't buy luxury watches. I didn't buy champagne. I took every dime of that blood money and bought commercial real estate near naval bases. While you were snorting your commission checks and pretending to be a big shot, I was building a portfolio with military discipline. I leaned in a fraction of an inch closer. Julian swallowed hard. I bought this house with sweat, cordite, and discipline, Julian. You didn't buy a damn thing in your entire life. You just drained the life out of a dying old man. Julian backed up. His heel caught on a piece of broken crystal. He stumbled backwards, spilling his bourbon down the front of his expensive suit jacket. He didn't even try to wipe it off. He just stared at me, completely broken, his ego shattered into a million pieces. I turned my head to Victoria. She was shaking, actually vibrating inside her black funeral dress. Her manicured hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides. The diamond ring, my mother's ring, flashed under the chandelier light. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was cracked, completely hollow. "If you owned it, if you owned all of it, why let us stay? Why let me throw you out to a cheap motel?" I let a cold, hard smile touch the corners of my mouth. I reached up and slowly adjusted the collar of my uniform. "Because Dad begged," I said. I stripped away the last layer of mercy. He sat in a lawyer's office, sweating through his shirt, and sold his soul to keep you parasites from knowing he was a total failure. I gave him a life estate clause. I let him play the king of the castle until his heart gave out, and I let you treat me like garbage because it was funny. I looked at Brittany. She was shaking her head, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "Brittany," I said softly, "you shoved $100 bill into my chest an hour ago. Keep it. You are going to need it for a security deposit on a cheap apartment." I looked back at Victoria. A pathetic, miserable lineup of fake wealth and hollow arrogance. You needed me to be poor. You needed Sarah the failure so you could feel good about yourselves. You needed someone to look down on. But the truth is, Victoria, I dropped my voice to a dead whisper. You have been squatting in my house for 13 months. You are living on my charity. You are the parasite. The crowd of wealthy antique dealers, country club snobs, and local gossips watched the entire execution. They were staring at Victoria, Julian, and Brittany like they were infected with a disease. The illusion was gone. The fake wealth was completely stripped away. They were exposed as broke, homeless frauds. There is nothing the elite class hates more than someone pretending to have money when their bank accounts are empty. I reached into the pocket of my tactical trousers. I pulled out my encrypted military smartphone. I unlocked the screen. It displayed the master deed, notarized, stamped, and federally authenticated. I held it up so the auctioneer behind the podium could clearly see the federal seal and my name. He swallowed hard. He looked at the document on the glowing screen, then looked at me. He gave a sharp, frantic nod. I put the phone away. I looked at the auctioneer. "You have exactly 5 minutes to clear my property," I told him. My voice cut across the dead silent room. "Pack up your podium. Get these people out the front door. Anyone left inside this house after 5 minutes gets arrested by the county sheriff for federal trespassing." I turned my back on my family. I didn't look at Julian's stained suit. I didn't look at Victoria's shattered glass. I didn't say another word. I just walked toward the heavy oak doors, leaving them standing in the smoking wreckage of their own destroyed egos. The auctioneer was already shoving his ledger into his briefcase. The sharp snap of the brass locks echoed loudly across the dead quiet room. Nobody else moved. Victoria's knees finally gave out. She collapsed onto the edge of the leather sofa. The shock wore off and the parasitic survival instincts kicked in. The crocodile tears started instantly. Heavy, dramatic sobs. Thick black mascara ran down her cheeks, cutting through her expensive layer of foundation. She looked up at me, her chest heaving, trying to play the victim one last time. "Sarah," she sobbed. Her voice was shaking, high-pitched and pathetic. She held her manicured hands out toward me. The diamond ring flashed, but this time it just looked cheap. "Please, we are family. You are my daughter. You cannot just throw me out on the street. Your father would never want this." I did not blink. I looked down at her. My eyes were completely dead. The air in the room felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. "You have exactly 90 days," I said. My voice was low, scraping against the silence like a rusted blade. 90 days to pack your underwear, your cheap shoes, and get off my property. She opened her mouth to argue, but I stepped closer, crushing the broken champagne glass under my heavy combat boot. The loud crunching sound made her flinch, and listened to me very carefully. I continued leaning down so only she and Julian could hear. "If a single piece of silver is missing, if one oil painting is scratched, if you try to pawn so much as a brass doorknob, I will drag you into a federal court. I will press charges for grand theft. I will personally make sure you spend the rest of your pathetic life sleeping on a concrete slab." Julian stared at the floor, absolutely paralyzed. He had nothing left to say. The bourbon stain on his suit jacket smelled sour. I turned my back on them. I started walking toward the front entrance. The crowd of local elites, the antique dealers, the country club snobs who had looked at me with pure disgust an hour ago, were entirely silent. As I walked forward, they stepped back. The sea of expensive tailored suits and designer dresses automatically parted. They pressed their backs against the expensive wallpaper just to give me a wide path. Nobody made eye contact. They were terrified. It was absolute authority earned through total dominance. I reached the grand foyer. The air here was colder. I stopped walking. Hanging on the wall to my right was the old family portrait, the massive oil painting they had commissioned when I was 18, right before they stole my college trust fund. Julian was front and center, wearing a custom suit, projecting his fake success. Brittany had a wide, hollow smile. Victoria was leaning against my father, and way in the back, standing in the dark shadows of the background, was me, the invisible scapegoat, the disposable daughter. I stood there and stared at the canvas. The paint was old, the edges slightly cracked from age. I looked at the dark, serious eyes of the 18-year-old girl in the painting, the girl they tried to break. I looked at her, and something inside my chest finally unlocked. For the first time in 20 years, I swear to God, the girl in the shadows was smiling. I turned away from the wall. I placed both hands flat against the heavy oak front doors and pushed. The rusted iron hinges screamed as the doors swung wide open. The blinding afternoon sun hit my face, and a cold, clean ocean wind rushed inside. 3 days later, the heavy Virginia humidity settled over Naval Station Norfolk. The air tasted like diesel fuel, rusted iron, and salt. I walked up the steel gangway of my destroyer. The heavy gray hull of the ship felt like a massive breathing animal under my boots. 2 Marine sentries stood at the top of the ramp. They did not care about the brand of my car or how much money I had in the bank. They saw the rank on my collar. They snapped to attention. Hard, sharp, perfect salutes. "Permission to come aboard, Captain," one of them said. "Granted," I replied, returning the salute. This was my family. A family built on blood cordite and absolute trust. We earned our place here. Nobody handed us a thing. I went straight to my cabin, locked the heavy steel door, and sat down at the bolted desk. I opened my laptop. My inbox was clogged. 5 emails from Julian, 7 from Brittany, 2 from Victoria. I did not read the long, pathetic paragraphs. I did not care about the fake apologies, the desperate begging for money, or the sudden miraculous realization that they loved me. A parasite only loves the host when the blood supply gets cut off. They were broke, desperate, and terrified of the real world. I hovered my mouse over the master select box. I checked it. All 14 emails highlighted in blue. I hit delete. I emptied the trash folder immediately. Gone. Wiped completely off the hard drive. I did not owe them closure. I did not owe them an explanation. The ultimate form of military discipline is knowing exactly when to cut off a dead limb to save the rest of the body. I closed the laptop. The quiet hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the metal desk into my hands. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the legal contract Hutchkins had finalized that morning. I was not going to bulldoze the 17-acre estate. I was not going to live in it either. That house was a monument to fake wealth and toxic pride. I was going to gut it. The paperwork authorized the immediate conversion of the main house and the guest properties into the Valiant Cove Retreat. a fully funded private rehabilitation center for combat veterans dealing with PTSD. The pristine manicured lawns where Julian used to park his leased Porsche would become therapy gardens. The massive mahogany study where my father tore up my college fund would become a counseling center for men and women who actually knew what sacrifice meant. I was taking a piece of toxic dirt and turning it into a fortress. I folded the contract and put it in my breast pocket. I grabbed my cover, walked out of the cabin, and climbed the steep metal ladders all the way up to the bridge. The ship's horn let out a massive, deafening blast that rattled my teeth. The heavy mooring lines dropped into the water. We were pulling out. I walked out onto the port side bridge wing. The wind whipped across my face, cold and completely clean. I looked out at the massive expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. I had fought a 20-year war against my own bloodline, and I had won it without firing a single bullet. I won it with silence, discipline, and a cold, hard grip on reality. The ghosts were gone. The anchor was finally cut. The absolute best revenge is not destroying someone else's life. It is taking the exact same bricks they threw at your head and using them to build an empire they are never allowed to enter. If my story gave you the strength to finally cut the dead weight out of your life, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Tell me exactly how you walked away from the storm. Because the ocean is wide open and we are not sinking anymore.